Malik Monk is just that dude. He's that guy. He is that guy. You don't start talking to Malik Monk, Gobert. You're going to learn that real quick. You don't start talking to him. Oh my goodness, a Malik Monk masterclass just coming up huge time after time after time. He's got ice in his veins. Unless it is at the free throw line, then he definitely doesn't. But because we won, we don't we don't need to talk about that, at least not yet. This team is just it taking years off my life by the game. It's the most stressful thing. This team just makes no sense at all. Like, how do you lose to just awful teams at home consistently, to undermanned teams consistently? Like, it's the NBA, it's going to happen sometimes, but it's like the consistency that the Kings lose to these awful teams, and the consistency that they, for some reason, just bounce back in road games most of the time against the best teams. It just makes no sense. I don't even know what the end of that game was. I mean, this entire game was just kind of disgusting. Like it was the referee show for the entire thing, pretty much. It was just foul calls on both ends. It felt like on every possession there was no flow whatsoever to this game, and that type of game definitely does not benefit the Kings, which is why I'm even more impressed that they were able to come away with a win. Like, usually a game like that is going to benefit the the team that can make free throws, for one, and then also just a better defensive team. And the Kings are a team that need to get out and run. And so when there's just so many foul calls, it disrupts that flow, but they still found ways to be able to get out and run. Just from the very start of this game, they inserted Keon Ellis into the starting lineup for Davion Mitchell, who started the first game when Fox was out. And I mean, I just don't get it personally. Like, I was happy when I saw Keon starting. I don't understand why Fox came back the first time, earlier in the season, and then Keon's out of the lineup. And then the first game, Fox is out, Davion's starting, and Keon isn't in the rotation. But then in the second half, they just throw him in there. And then now all of a sudden he's starting this game. I don't know why, because it feels like every time he comes in and he gets consistent playing time, like a good amount of minutes, he makes a huge impact. And that's exactly what he did in this game. Keon was amazing, and the Kings were locked in from the start. It was a super fun start. Just totally jumped the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves just didn't come to play. They had Ant in, who was questionable coming in, and then he didn't play the second half, most likely because of the birth of his kid, probably. So that's something I'll get to. But the Kings they started the game super active on the defensive end, and Keegan and Herter, no hesitation from three. You had Keegan attacking the rack, not necessarily finishing. Keegan's finishing in this game around the rim was a bit rough, but then it would create looks for Domas, either on the glass or just from a pass. And the Kings, they got off to a 15-2 start. And it looked like a complete replica of the game against Denver, where they got off to a really quick start. But in that Denver game, they totally faded very quickly. That's not really the case in this game. Yes, the Timberwolves came back, and they might have taken the lead at some point in the second quarter, or it was tied. I can't really remember. Oh yeah, they had the lead. But it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel like a total collapse from the Kings. It just felt like the Wolves grinded their way back in, hit some shots, Kings missed some shots, just things didn't go the Kings' way. And so it's not like the Kings weren't competing the entire time, because they were. The defense definitely dropped off in the second quarter, but it wasn't the same type of drop off that we saw against Denver. Against Denver, it was just not getting back in transition and gifting Denver open looks right at the rim, or just wide open threes. Whereas in this game, it was a little more complex than that. It was the Timberwolves beating us in the half court, and it had a lot to do with Keegan guarding Ant. And then I don't know, it's like Keegan and Domas weren't really on the same page as to how they wanted to guard Ant. You could see Domas getting mad at Keegan a lot. So it led to the Timberwolves getting to the rim a lot, especially Ant. And that led to a lot of fouls. But the Kings just were able to stick with it. And I thought that was really impressive for them to even though things weren't really going their way, they stayed in the game and they didn't just get totally run over. And I feel like that was kind of what happened throughout the entire game. There was plenty of things that didn't go our way, whether it was in the fourth quarter when we start off and get four really good looks from three. I think Lyles had two of them, Herter had one, someone else had a good look from three, I think. Davion, I think it was, and all four of them missed. And then Jaden McDaniels just comes down, I think it was, and hits a three. And that was when Sabonis was out to start the start of the fourth quarter, and the Timberwolves went on a big run, attacking Lyles inside. And I felt like that was another moment where the Kings could have folded, especially without Fox to stop the bleeding, and they didn't. And then there were plenty of plays down the stretch where, I mean, just the officiating in this game was all over the place. I don't, it's like they were calling everything, and then, but then there were certain things they let go. Like, I didn't understand it. There was foul trouble all over the place. You had Gobert, Cat, and Jaden McDaniels all ending on 5 fouls, and Sabonis eventually fouled out in overtime. It was insane that Cat nor Gobert fouled out in this game, and there were plays that we definitely got to talk about, like Karl-Anthony Towns leading with his knee into guys, which somehow he's getting away with. So there were moments like that, and then there were moments where the Timberwolves got offensive rebounds, and those are always killer too. But every single time the Kings would respond. And it was just really impressive how well the Kings offense played throughout the entire game against a Timberwolves team that is the best defensive team in the NBA. They're amazing at protecting the paint. And it's not like with Ant not playing in the second half, they should drop off defensively. Like, sure, he can defend, but then you just have, Nickeil Alexander-Walker coming off the bench, or I mean, they put now Nas Reed in, so they were running a three big lineup. But then even there, it was tough. It's tough to score inside against three bigs like that. But the Kings were able to find a way to still dominate in the paint. And I said coming into this game, it was going to be really important for the Kings to knock down threes to win this game. And it was, I thought that was going to be just a big key for if the Kings had wanted any chance to win this game, was they were going to have to outshoot the Timberwolves. Well, the Kings shot 11 for 29 and the Timberwolves shot 12 for 31. So the Timberwolves shot a better percentage, also shot more of them, which is surprising. And the Timberwolves are just such a weird team to me. I don't know if I really have any faith in them to make noise in the playoffs. Just with, I don't know, the way they play is so weird, especially offensively. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I don't care if you don't have Anthony Edwards for that second half. If you can't beat this Kings team with the amount of size that you have on that front line, like, we suck defending the paint, and somehow you're still able to defend well enough to get this win. There are so many moments that I want to talk about, so many things that I want to talk about. I feel like I'm just jumping all over the place because it's like I can't go through the entire game because that's just when it's an overtime game, and when there are just so many plays down the stretch that I could talk about. So I guess we'll go to the end of the game, and in that fourth quarter, I mentioned it, that the Wolves were just killing us from the 3-point line, and we just were not responding. Like Herter, he started out super aggressive from three, and then I feel like he just lost that aggression and maybe lost his like confidence, I guess. I don't know. It just felt like he wasn't really shooting shots that he would normally shoot. And then you had Keegan, who just wasn't getting open from the 3-point line very much. And, he had a solid game in other ways, but he wasn't really shooting the three. You had Lyles, who couldn't hit his threes. And honestly, it's insane that we were able to win while playing Lyles at the backup five so much, but him not knocking down his threes. Because normally, like what happened last season, the Kings went to the small ball five. Was it an overtime game as well where Sabonis fouled out? And the Kings went to Lyles at the five, and it worked really well because it pulled Rudy Gobert away from the basket when Gobert was guarding Lyles. And Lyles was knocking down his threes. And so in this game, he wasn't hitting his shots. And so there were definitely times where it looked like a bad decision to go with Lyles, especially at the start of the fourth where the Kings had, was it 8, 9 point lead, something like that, and within 2 minutes with Lyles at the five, it just vanished. But then there were other times where it worked well. And even though he wasn't knocking down the three, the Kings were able to, one, still use that space effectively. And then also there were some big plays. Like Trey, he had 3 points in this game, but he impacted the game in so many other ways with his rebounding, he had a huge block in overtime. And obviously, when you have the Wolves playing a three big lineup, rebounding is going to be tough. But the Kings actually out rebounded the Wolves, and they out rebounded them not on the defensive glass, but on the offensive glass and total by one. And the Kings were the ones with 14 offensive rebounds. And so a big part of the Kings being able to score in the paint, one is fast break points. The Kings dominated the fast break, and that came from forcing turnovers because the Kings had 8 steals. Keon had a career high 4 of those. He was everywhere. It was amazing. But then also the offensive glass was huge in getting points in the paint. And then on the other side, it just took a total team effort to be able to rebound. And there were offensive rebounds down the stretch in overtime that looked like they could be the death of us. And they turned out not to be. I thought Herder got a huge offensive board late in the fourth that he kicked out to Monk for 3. And then even the play late where Sabonis gets fouled under the rim, I think there was an offensive rebound, and then, it's Sabonis fighting down low, and he gets fouled. And then in overtime, I think the Wolves got maybe 1 or 2 offensive rebounds near the start of overtime, if I remember correctly. But after that, the Kings were able to keep them off the glass, and they were able to limit them to 1 shot, which honestly felt like a miracle to me because the Kings have not been great when it comes to, they've been a really good defensive rebounding team this season, but they haven't been good when it comes to rebounding down the stretch of games when things get a little chaotic. But not just that, especially because they went to a zone defense, which honestly I didn't love. And it had a lot to do with Sabonis fouling out. And, you put out Alex Len in there. I mean, that was an option. You could have put Alex Len in there. They opted not to do that. And so they went with Lyles and they went to the zone. It feels like every time the Kings go to zone this season, they get picked apart right away. The only time it feels like it's worked was against Miami in that huge almost comeback that we just had. But every other time it feels like the communication isn't there. The guys don't know exactly what they're doing, and it ends up in a pretty easy open look, either right inside or from the 3-point line for the other team. And it looked to be the same case when we first went to zone. There were a couple times we went to it in regulation and it didn't really work. But in overtime, we went to it, and again, at first it didn't really work that well, but then it got better, and as time went on, the Kings kind of settled into it, and it did force the Timberwolves to have problems. It was funny, I think the first time the Kings went to it, not in overtime, but in regulation, the Kings defenders, they looked confused. They weren't really in the right spots. And I think it was Jaden McDaniels, got the ball pretty open in the middle of the floor, like going to the rim. But he was just like, he didn't expect to be open. So he just like turned around and threw the ball right to Malik Monk. Like the defense was so confused that it confused the offense. But I guess that's the perks to a zone. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to confuse the offense and throw in a look that they haven't seen. So I guess that works. It was really hard to see a world where the Kings were going to come away with a win when Sabonis fouled out early in that overtime. And the Wolves got into the penalty so quickly. It was hard to watch, just all those foul calls. I mean, how do you get into the penalty before the last 2 minutes in overtime? But that zone defense, it did what it needed to do. It got enough stops. And importantly, they were able to finish out those stops with the rebounds. And then on the other end, just the Malik Monk show. He had that look at the end of the fourth that could have won it. And I'll touch on that a bit because that's pretty much what I thought was going to happen. Just before it even got inbounded, I'm like, there's no way this is going to work because it's just going to be a contested Malik jumper. And I was right. But it was honestly a better look than I was imagining in my head. Like, it wasn't the worst look in the world. He had space. He was knocking down his threes. Like, I get it. But him not even hitting rim, so giving time to the Timberwolves, that's rough. And also just it being a tie game, like you could at least pretend like you're going to the rim. Like it definitely was not the worst shot in the world, but It felt like we should have gotten something, at least fake something going to the rim, even if in your head you're always going to step back and shoot the three. But then he came up huge, hitting three after three in overtime. Then we had the Lyles block, and then we had Monk getting to the rim after just a crazy possession of going nowhere and getting fouled, and then missing both free throws. I believe the Kings missed both free throws 4 times in this game. Maybe I'm even missing one, but it was definitely 3 times in the second quarter where Len, Barnes, and Sabonis all missed 2 in a row, and then Malik late. You also had just the Kings kind of playing well defensively, but then throwing away opportunities. I mean, the Timberwolves throwing away opportunities too. It was just such a chaotic game where you had the Timberwolves throwing the ball away, and then you have Herter missing a pretty open three. Then you have Herter missing a open mid-ranger. But then you have Naz Reid missing. And this is like the first time I've ever seen Naz Reid shoot poorly from three against the Kings. So that was a miracle. But then Lyles, he comes up big, hitting 1 free throw. Of course, he had to miss the first. I mean, 54% from the line, 13 for 24. It's just, I don't know what to say at this point. If we lost this game, what I would have come in and said, I would have said that was a great fight. There was just no flow to that game. We did everything we could to win without Fox in Minnesota, except we didn't hit free throws. Like, that would have been what I would have said. Like, you did everything except hit some threes. Hard to get mad at that when you still shot 38%. It's a fine percentage. But then just the free throws. I mean, you can't explain it. Obviously, you can look at Sabonis and Fox not being great free throw shooters and them shooting the majority of our free throws. But what you can explain is Malik now missing all these in the clutch, or Lyles all of a sudden missing in the clutch and being a bad free throw shooter, Len not being able to hit a free throw to save his life, and Barnes going 0 for 2. If this team makes the playoffs, or if they're in the play-in and the game comes down to free throw shooting, and then the Kings end up getting bounced or lose one game, because of free throw shooting or even more, then it's like, how do you even go about fixing that? Because you could say, oh, just go get better shooters. I mean, we have good shooters on this team. I don't get it. Anthony Edwards in this game, like I said, he only played the first half. He went 2 for 11, 6 for 6 from the free throw line. But the Kings definitely struggled against him attacking the rim. He had those 6 free throws. He was also he was creating problems getting downhill in the second quarter. They did a really good job in the first quarter, and in the second quarter, they didn't do a great job, and they looked a little confused, or like Keegan wasn't really doing what he was supposed to do. He was constantly just either trailing, or I don't know how they wanted to play it. And that was something that I was really interested in, to see how they would come out and try to play it in the second half, because obviously they would make adjustments, but we didn't get to see it. So not disappointed that Ant didn't play, we'll take that, but a little disappointed that we didn't get to see the Kings defense try to respond after that poor second quarter guarding him. And the Kings definitely struggled with fouling. They were constantly in the penalty early, and on the other side, it felt like the Timberwolves, for at least 3 of the quarters, and then I think overtime as well, they had fouls to give really late in the game, and so, or in the quarter, that is. So, like on our last possession, they would just give a foul to disrupt things. But I can't be too mad with it, because it was the Kings trying to play physical defense. The refs, they were calling a lot, but I will take the Kings trying to play physical defense and disrupt the opponent, because it never felt, well, not never. For most of the game, it felt like the Kings didn't allow the Wolves to get into any sort of flow. They never let Cat get into a flow. I think Anthony Edwards, like I said, I think he got it going a little bit, but for the most part, they didn't let guys get into a flow. I would say the one area where they struggled, Trey Lyles did not have a great game defensively when he was asked to guard Naz Reid. I just don't think that's not a good matchup for him. He's not quick enough. But you had Keon, who only played 19 minutes. Like, he got into foul trouble, 4 fouls, but it felt like he was involved in every defensive play, constantly disrupting every time the Wolves would drive. He was there disrupting it. He needs to play more when Fox comes back because he's so disruptive defensively. And he was making the right decisions offensively. He wasn't forcing anything. There were many times where he was pretty open in the mid-range, but he wouldn't shoot it. And I don't think it would necessarily be a bad thing if he shot it if he's open. Like he can, but also he knows that his role on this team is to obviously play like he does on defense, but then on the offensive end, shoot threes and be a connector. Just in this league, if you are not out there for your scoring, you're probably not supposed to take mid-range shots. And so I think he knows that, and that's why he wasn't taking those. I also think the defense inside by Sabonis was really good. He had 3 blocks. I think the only times where he really faltered was when he would get sealed off by Gobert, which some of those definitely were fouls. But Sabonis did a really good job, obviously, rebounding the basketball and protecting the paint. Barnes had his moments of protecting the paint. Keegan had moments protecting the paint. And then also Monk just like coming out of nowhere and being a rim protector is always so fun. Like Monk didn't have a block, but he met, I think it was Anthony Edwards at the rim and prevented a bucket. A guy that I don't even think I've talked about at all is Davion Mitchell coming in, playing 25 minutes. Like he got moved to the bench and he comes out and he puts up 16 points on 7 for 8 shooting. He was huge. That one miss was from the 3-point line, but man, he was huge getting to the rim. His scoring ability, he's showing what I thought he would be able to do way more of consistently. When he came into the league, like in summer league, he was great getting to the rim and scoring and just finding other ways to score. And we saw flashes of that in his rookie season, especially when Fox sat out and they, went to just Davion late in the season. We saw his scoring ability and then off that, the playmaking. And then we just didn't see that at all last year. And we just have barely seen it at all this year. But this is what we need from him. Obviously not 7 for 8 every time, but just those moments of getting to the rim. And he has played better as of late and has had those moments more consistently where he'll have those 2 drives a game where he'll make both of his layups. And so just to not be a liability offensively is huge. And then he'll have games like this where he shoots even more. And that's huge for him to be a positive offensively along with what he can do defensively. It's interesting though with Davion, I think playing well, and then we need to play Keon Ellis, but also Chris Duarte has been playing really well as of late, and so he only gets 6 minutes in this game, and so I think it's great that we have these role players that are all playing well at the same time because we just haven't got a lot of production past 8 or 7, 8 guys off the bench this season, and so we really need those guys to be productive, at least sporadically, and to just be NBA players when we call on them, because Duarte and Davion early in the season just didn't even look like NBA players, and so now it's good to see them doing what we know they're capable of doing as of late on a more consistent basis. This team is just so confusing. Like, they play great defense at one point and then they don't. I don't know what to think because like the last 10 games I think I saw they were ranked 29th defensively. But then they'll have these spurts where it's like for a quarter they play really well defensively and it's not just a fluke defensively. It's not just the other team missing shots. Like you can see all the guys impacting, like Keegan impacting with his length and Herter doing the same, Keon doing the same, and every guy just working hard out there. I think the one thing is like with this roster, I don't think we'll ever be consistent defensively. But I think what we're seeing is this is a team that doesn't need much when it comes to the additions from the outside to become a consistent defensive team, at least, average defensively. At least that's what I hope that means. Them showing it for every now and then maybe just means that missing 1 or 2 pieces defensively to be a consistent defensive team. We had an unsuccessful challenge by Mike Brown where, at live action, I thought it was a block on Lyles, but then you look at the replay and he's clearly there in time. And Cat, okay, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's a Kings fan knows, but it's just so frustrating how the game is called differently, just depending on the team, because you see every single time Keegan goes to the rim with his knee out, it's an offensive foul. Every time. You had a play, someone posted on Twitter after Cat did it, where Steven Adams is moving, not at all established, and in the restricted area, and Keegan's knee isn't nearly as out as Cat's was, and it's an offensive foul. And so Lyles, who isn't moving and isn't in the restricted area, is totally set before Cat gathers, gets kneed in the chest, and they review it and uphold it. Like, this just can't keep happening. And they said it's because his torso was moving. You don't have to be a statue to take a charge. So it was the wrong call on so many levels. One, the knee, so he shouldn't even have to be set. Two, he was set. And three, they said his torso was sliding. I mean, no, it wasn't. It wasn't even. Yeah, maybe his body moved slightly. That's just what happens. But his feet stayed planted and he stayed within the same vertical zone. Just incredibly frustrating, and I don't get it. And then there was a play where Cat again leads with his knee. Great defense, great verticality by Domas, but he pays the price with a knee straight to the you-know-wheres, and he probably went and threw up in the tunnel. Very unfortunate for him, but Cat got away with that. And then all of that, not even mentioning Gobert winding up with his elbow, and then so many people saying, oh, it's the Sabonis special. No, Sabonis does not wind up with his elbow and just smash a guy's side. Like, he doesn't do that. Sabonis uses his shoulders to move players. Maybe sometimes it's an offensive foul and he gets called for it. He does not wind up with his elbow and then smash it into a guy's side that hard. I mean, that was incredible. And it was incredible because of the wind up. So it was so clear what he was about to do, and there was nobody blocking the ref's sight from it. It was right in front of him. I mean, that was just an incredible no call. And so that's why it was frustrating when Sabonis then fouls out, but Cat and Gobert were still out there, especially when Gobert fouled Sabonis at the end of the fourth quarter, near the end, and it wasn't called, and Cat got Malik called for a foul even though he hooked him. And so it's just all those moments where it's like, how is Sabonis the one who fouls out and not Cat or Gobert? But somehow it didn't matter. There were finally a couple plays, though, where Gobert did get called for a charge on Keegan, and Cat got called for a hook on Barnes. So eventually they did call offensive fouls on those two. But also another part of the game I want to talk about. One is Barnes hitting that corner three to have the Kings get the lead at half. That was huge. But also in that third quarter, the Kings went through a 4-minute field goal drought. But their defense kept them in it and kept it like tied, which was just huge for us to be able to rely on the defense even when the offense was going through a drought against a team like Minnesota. Also, you had Sabonis ending that drought with a three, but then it was the Monk show at the end of the third quarter, and he just carried the offense to a 9-point lead. I didn't really talk about Alex Len also. He came in for 5 minutes, and I thought he was actually solid for those 5 minutes. He missed a couple free throws, but he was a presence around the rim in the pick and roll. Missed an alley-oop dunk, but I think that was tough. Also missed another layup, but he put it back himself, so that was fine. And I thought he was smart in the way he handled the dribble handoff game. So he was making smart decisions there. And then also, man, there's just so many things to talk about. So I guess Harrison Barnes, I also have to talk about. He did a really good job defending Cat all night. Didn't let Cat get going at all. And then he also had some nice offensive moments again. Other than the free throw shooting, I just have to preface like every guy with other than the free throw shooting. But he had some good moments attacking Cat, especially when Cat was in foul trouble, and he got him in foul trouble, so that was huge. And then, of course, Sabonis getting the 21, 15, and 8. And he only had one turnover, and that was huge because a lot of times Sabonis, without Fox, he can try to force things, but he didn't. And especially against the team like the Timberwolves with all their length and defensive ability, for him to not turn the ball over was huge. I think that's all I want to talk about for this game. There's so much that happened, but just a massive win, but also one that in a way I kind of expected, just because this team losing a few in a row and losing to, the shorthanded Heat team at home, and then you go on the road without Fox. Of course they're going to win one, even though it's against Denver and Minnesota. It just feels like with this team, we shouldn't look at who they're playing against to determine whether we think they're going to win or not. We should just look at the previous results, and it's like, okay, they've lost, they lost two in a row before this. Now they've won one. Okay, so now we go home against Chicago. So what do we think is going to happen? I'm going to guess a win. Then I'm going to guess we go to LA. I'm going to guess a win against the Lakers. Then we come home against San Antonio. That's definitely a loss. Home against Houston, probably a loss. Then home against Milwaukee, probably a win there. It's just like, it doesn't matter who we're playing against. You just guess. But the next game is against Chicago at home on Monday. Hopefully Fox should be back by then. It's a left knee contusion, I think, or is it a right knee? I don't remember which knee. I think that's one of those where it's like a pain tolerance thing, and it's not really going to get worse if he plays. And so with him being questionable for these last two games and then a little extended break here, a 2-day break between these games, he'll probably go. That would be my guess. And it just feels like, I constantly say it, but it's one of those games that you have to win against a not great team at home in this Western Conference. It just feels like with the consistency or the lack thereof with this team, like, how am I supposed to preview any games? It's just, okay, which Kings team is going to show up? Or maybe they'll just show up for the first quarter and then not show up for the middle two quarters and then show up in the fourth quarter. The inconsistency is not fun, but then when it's a win in Minnesota without Fox, then it is fun. And so it's very much, the highs are super high with this team and the lows are super low. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back on Monday to recap the game against Chicago. Peace.